Hi and welcome back to my channel. In this video you have my next reading vlog. This morning I got a lot read. I think I'm going to try to do this as weekly wrap-ups because I'm gonna go for that biggest August yet. I figured out why there was that seeming discrepancy between the page numbers for a month where I read 31 books and the month where I read 82, you know, this past June. And that's because on Storygraph, it doesn't convert hours listened to pages. So for this past June, it had the hours listened, the pages separately. And so the physical pages that I read in June were still a little bit more than those 31. If I added up all of the pages for June, it was more like 24,000. Yeah, I read a lot in June. I'm gonna try to do my best August yet as an August while I've been teaching, and I'm gonna aim for 12,000 pages. I don't quite need to get all the way to 12,000. I need to get to like 11,500. 12 is my favorite number, and I just like round numbers, so I'm gonna go for 12,000. But I'm gonna do that lightly, and I'm not gonna put a ton of pressure on myself. So far, so good. I'm keeping up with it. I haven't read much physically, but because I had that time to work in my classroom, I have met that with audiobooks. I finished one and gotten just a little bit under halfway of another. So I'm going to talk about the one that I finished, mention the one that I got halfway through, not give you any of my thoughts really. I'm gonna save my thoughts more for wrap-ups through this week. So it's more like a recent reads wrap-up vlog type style. The book that I finished was The Bullet Swallower. So what I did on my Libby app is I sorted it by due next, and this was the one due next. It was the earliest due. So this did not take super long to read because it is fairly short. It's a little under 300 pages. I think it's like 288 pages. This was a fascinating book to read. It's not a style that I've really ever read before, although maybe it's a very unique style. So there's definitely magical realism mixed into this. There's also historical. It's a family saga, but it's centered mainly on one person in this generational story. So this particular family came over with the conquistadors. They had a lot of money. They basically became little mini emperors of their own little area that was basically not that far over the Rio Grande border into Mexico. But when they came over, obviously it was part of New Spain. Over the years, they were able to have such tight manipulative control. And this whole part is told at the very beginning in a prologue sort of thing. Then something happens when one of these characters is trying to exert his control over the people, and it ends up tragically and sends the family basically into destitution, although they still want to claw their way back to having all this money. And that's where you get the main character of the book. Antonio knows about the storied history of his past, but he doesn't have a lot of money. He has a wife, he has a couple kids, but the way that he wants to get back to the grandeur of his family in the past is by going out and being a bandit, basically. He had this opportunity that he thinks to go into what is now the United States, this was 1895, and rob a train. It's a little dicey because he's going into Texas. This is the height of the Texas Rangers, not known for their law following, even though they are or were technically officers of the law, and things go south in the proverbial sense. His side of the narrative is like his life is completely transformed by this, but it also starts to bring in a bit of the magical realism because there's this other character that's basically like an embodiment of death, almost. He is this shadow that's haunting the family because of the actions of that, I think like the grandfather figure of Antonio. And Antonio was supposed to die when he was a child, when he was first born. But this figure says, I don't want to do that to a baby. And so he basically is like following along Antonio's life. There are several times where Antonio should have died, but he doesn't. Like, he dies, but he doesn't. So that brings in the magical realism part. There's also another timeline set in the 50s or the 60s, I can't remember exactly, where it is the grandson of Antonio, who is also dealing with his older father, who is the son of Antonio. He's Juan Antonio, named after his father. Jaime, the character in this timeline, is he's an actor, a director, a writer, and he wants to make this movie, and he's researching his family history, and he's trying to find out certain things, but his father is very much against this. It was interesting balancing the two because the majority of the plot is with the Antonio timeline. Him attempting this train robbery, it going south, him trying to survive or deal with this. But then you would get random chapters interspersed periodically of Jaime, primarily. Juan Antonio, his father, the son of Antonio, is there a lot. And also the shadow figure is there still with the family. And it was very fascinating. I really enjoyed reading this book. You know, it really struggled with how to talk about what I enjoyed about it, because there are lots of things in here that don't make sense, but I don't think that they're supposed to. And I really appreciated the characterization of Antonio, and even Juan Antonio, that you find out after the fact some of the things that were involved in his upbringing that make him the way that he is. And I think that Elizabeth Gonzalez-James did a really good job with this, and it's non-traditional storytelling that I really vibed with. Was it perfect? No. There were times where I'm like, why do we need this whole Jamie side of it? But it does come full circle at the end, and you see why she had this part of the storyline woven into the plot. So I really enjoyed it. The book that I picked up after I finished that, and that I'm just under halfway through, is The Bookbinder by Pip Williams. There are other versions that call this The Bookbinder of Jericho, and I think Jericho is one of the schools in Oxford. So this is set at Oxford University Press. The main character, Peggy, sorry. That's short for Margaret. She has a twin sister who most likely is somewhere on the autism spectrum, or some sort of intellectual disability like that. And I really appreciate how Pip Williams deals with that. And they are identical twins. And so at some points, Peggy has some bits of jealousy and trying to figure out where she fits in with her sister. But this is set during the time of World War I, and it is showing the home front aspect of it. I'm not super compelled with it. It's good. Nothing has been done poorly in it. I just don't think I'm gonna rate it highly. There's not a lot of really compelling things driving the plot in this one. Maybe there will be in the second half, so I'll come back to that when I've actually finished this book. Physically, I'm reading Fablehaven Book 5. That will probably take a while because it is 677 pages. What middle grade book needs to be over 600 pages? What middle grade book needs to be over 400 pages? I don't think any do. But I'll save my thoughts on the Fablehaven series for when I finish that. Right now, I'm only like 10, 15 pages into it. Okay, this update is coming to you Saturday. I almost forgot what day of the week it is. I probably could have updated on, I don't even know if did I update on Thursday? I must have. I don't even remember the days of the week at this point, but it is what it is. So I actually have 3 books to update about. I have been reading a lot of audiobooks, and thus I've finished all of these via audiobooks. I'm just going through all of the books that I have checked out as audiobooks. Most of them, if not all of them, were on my pile of possibilities for Tarot Readathon for July, hence why I had them as audiobooks. Let me just get into this. First one to talk about is The Bookbinder. I was about halfway through this the last time I updated, so it must have been Thursday. This was just fine. This book did not do anything wrong. It also didn't, it's not that it didn't do anything right either, but it just didn't do anything that really captured my attention, which I found a bit frustrating because I think that the author, Pip Williams, did a really good job in exploring the effects that war has on people. This is set during the time of World War I, and there are two characters specifically, two Belgian refugees. One was a soldier who was traumatically injured. The other was a mother who lost her family. Pip Williams does a really good job in exploring PTSD in both of these characters and how it plays out and how they interact. I mentioned that the main character is a twin and her sister is somewhere on the spectrum. And the mother who lost her whole family had a son who was very similar to the main character's sister and thus really gravitated towards her. And it was really interesting to see how that played out. But ultimately, I was just not really super engaged with the book and wanting to read more. I haven't run any of these books through Cawpile. I really have been slacking on that portion of it, but I need to get to it. This probably will end up a 4-star because it didn't do anything wrong. It just really is not the book for me. Then we get to one that was surprising, and that is CeCe Rios and the Desert of Souls. So this is a middle grade book. This is one of the books that I got from Owl Crate on their Black Friday sale, not last year, but the year before, and was finally getting around to it. And so the character is 12 years old, almost 13 in this. I don't remember where it is, but in that culture, they have this split, this divide in their mythology where they follow all of the different gods that created the world, but there's also these criaturas, these creatures that are negative and that they will hunt and try to kill. On the flip side, there's brujas who enslave the criaturas, and it's really negative, and it's also a bad thing to be a bruja, but the brujas are part of this mythology. And there's also the idea of curanderas or healers, but those are supposed to have gone extinct 200 years before. And it was a really interesting mix. And the driving thing in this story is that her older sister, let me back up a little bit. When CeCe was 7, she encountered a criatura or one of the goddesses. I don't remember that part. But she didn't want to kill or enslave or whatever they do to this. She's very compassionate. That seemed not natural for her culture, her family. And she had been living with what a lot of people think of as a curse because she was kind. I forget the name of who she saved, but she's seen as having a curse and being more related to the water than to fire, which the desert goddess is associated with fire. And her older sister is participating in some sort of ritual that they have, a yearly thing. Somehow she runs off, goes into the desert. Her sister comes, but then is taken by basically a Dark Lord, the highest of these evil criaturas. And so CeCe is like, the only way to get to where her sister is being held is she has to compete in the Bruja trials because the winners are able to go into that area. And she's like, this is the only way to do it. And to do it, I have to enslave, basically, a criatura and get them to fight to me. And she doesn't want to do it. And there's like found family being gathered here with the different criaturas that she encounters. I really enjoyed this. I'm struggling though to think about some aspects of it and what to rate it because it gets a lot darker than you would expect from a middle grade fantasy. And it's not that CeCe reads more mature than her age. She definitely reads like a 12, almost 13-year-old, but almost as if she's been forced to grow up a lot faster than she should have, which in this situation she kind of was. But there's some really realistic, even though it's fantasy, dark things that happen. And it's just at a maturity level that I think might be perfect for, advanced 7th grade, 8th grade for sure. I will definitely be continuing in this series. This book definitely worked for me. A book that I just finished on my run, and I don't like how this cover feels, but is The Twyford Code. This book did not work for me. It's not that it was bad. I was intrigued at various points along the way, but the way that the story was told did not work for me. It's not the fact that it was mixed media throughout. It wasn't even really mixed media. It was one type of media, mainly, that's not traditional narrative form. Basically, the whole story is told through voice memos recorded on a phone. It worked when the main character was basically dictating to the phone, but anytime he tried to secretly record a conversation or was recording conversation between various people, this book, you're reading the transcript. And so the audio is saying things like voice 1, voice 2. You can somewhat figure out which one is the main character, Steve, and which one are the other characters, but it's hard to grasp onto as you're reading it. And I really like where it went in the end and how it was all resolved and wrapped up. I'm not going to mention that, obviously, because it's a mystery novel. There were points, and I'll say a little bit of it was because I was listening to it, last night as part of my winding down before I went to sleep, and this morning before I started my run. So I missed some pieces, but not very much. But that made it so hard to grasp on and get back into the story, but I didn't even really miss that much. If I set that aside, because I know part of that was my fault, it still didn't necessarily work for me how it was told. So I might give Janice Hallett another try, but this one didn't work for me. The book that I picked up or started listening to after that, because it was about halfway through my run, is This Cursed Light, which is book 2 in that duology. And I enjoyed where the first book went, This Vicious Grace. I'm finding it hard to be compelled or motivated to care about where it's going in the second one. And in the first book, in this duology, you have what's known as a Fenestra. She has this power where she can amplify the power of others and uses it every cycle to defeat these creatures that rise up and etc. Alicia, this Fenestra, her power is like on an even bigger scale, and she's accidentally killed the people whose power she's supposed to magnify and work together with, but then they're able to solve some problems through some crafty machinations at the end of the first book. And I think it could have easily been wrapped up and been a standalone. I'm not sure, and I'm struggling to see why it was made into a duology, because the things that they're dealing with in the second book don't seem connected to the first book. I'm only 35% of the way through that one, so we'll see, but it might have been a book that was better off being a standalone than a duology. I'm not going to have a super long update for the vlog this time around. I'm still working on filming my July wrap up. While I was here, I decided to go ahead and get this update done. I did finish another book, but as I finished, I discovered that it is a St. Martin's Press book. So I mentioned it in the previous clip. I haven't decided what I'm going to do with that portion, but I have finished the book. It was slightly disappointing and fine-ish, but I'm not going to talk more about it because I am still participating in the boycott of St. Martin's Press when I'm aware that a book is published by them. I don't anticipate finishing more books today because I'm going to try to read more of the 5th Fablehaven book, and that is so long. There's no way that I'm going to be able to finish that today. So this is it for the update for Sunday. Okay, I'm going to update real quick. I have 3 books to update about. One I just finished about 20 minutes or so ago. I didn't update yesterday because yesterday was back to school night and got home around 7:30. So was not in the mood. Anyway, I got to be quicker about it because even though we can go in later today, still running late in my mind. Anyway, the first of those is Amira and Hamza, The War to Save the World. I think I've read at least one other book by Samira Ahmed before, a young adult book, and I have another one of her young adult books on my TBR, on my own TBR even. And I'm really glad because this was such a fun little middle grade fantasy book. So you have two siblings, Amira, sorry. It's Samira, the author. Amira and Hamza, they're about a year and a half apart. Samira portrays their sibling dynamics so well. Hamza is this ridiculous 10-year-old boy. Again, the characterization was done very well. Amira loves astrology and science, and they get to go to this big planetary thing, a constellation. There's going to be this convergence of different types of moons, blood moon, full moon, etc. And it's at some sort of Islamic center where there's like museum pieces as well. And Hamza accidentally like picks up one of them and then drops it. And that sort of unleashes this whole, we've got to save the world sort of thing, and brings in a couple jinns. The way that they're going through it, I just really enjoyed how both of these characters grew throughout the book. Now, Amira is the main character in here, but Hamza gets a couple point of view chapters, but it's just done so wholesomely. I really enjoyed it, and now that I think about it, I was just going to put it into a box that I was going to take into my classroom, but I'm going to keep it in my library here at home until my August wrap up, and then I'll take it into my classroom. Now, the next two, I have to admit that for a couple of different reasons, I wasn't necessarily paying as close attention to the story as I should. So first off, during the day yesterday, I listened to This Wicked Fate, which is the second and conclusion to this duology. And I was really surprised by the first book in the duology, which is This Poison Heart. This takes the idea of Greek mythology, but these are descendants of it. That's the type of mythology that I can deal with. I have to admit that throughout the day, there would be various points where maybe someone would come into my classroom and I was interacting with them because I'm listening to it with my aftershocks, and my aftershocks are over the ear and I can still hear, and etc. And I wasn't necessarily close enough to my phone to pause the audiobook, so I'd miss some points then, or I'd be working on something and zone out and not pay as close attention. So there were parts of this that I missed. But I still think that Kalynn Bayron did a decent job in wrapping up this duology. And I will say this gets far more into the Greek mythology side of it, with Briseis dealing with her own heritage. So it had a different tone than the first book. In the first book, she doesn't know any of this. She knows that she has this affinity for plants that's not natural, but she doesn't know anything about her biological family. And so that book is a journey of discovery of that. This is more typical quest mythology based, and I enjoyed it. It's not going to be an overall necessarily 5-star. I don't think it's going to get 4.5 stars. It's probably going to be a 4-star, but part of that, it's a me problem. Lastly, we have A Comb of Wishes. I have just about a minute before I need to head out the door, so this is going to be quick. And A Comb of Wishes, it's set on a, I think, fictional Caribbean island. I'll have to look it up. It said that the basis is St. Rita. But in this, the main character has recently lost her mother, I think like 3 months ago, and she's dealing with that grief. So this book is an exploration of that. And she encounters a comb, which is basically a mermaid's comb, and part of the mythology is if you return the comb to the mermaid, you can rake it across the water and then return it to them and you get a wish. And so, of course, what do you think she wants to wish for? And this was a really interesting exploration of that. I will have to admit, I had to back up a little bit a couple different times. And this morning, even though I was actively trying to listen to it, I did sort of unfocus. I didn't fall asleep, but I wasn't full on paying attention to this. So I missed a couple points, but I think what Lisa Stringfellow did here was really good, and dealing with the idea of grief, which unfortunately so many kids have to deal with. I think she explored it in a really meaningful way. So I wish that my experiences with both of these books had been a little bit better. I'm going to try to do a better job in focusing on the audiobook and choosing activities to do with it that will not distract me or lead me to falling asleep. And now I gotta get to work. Okay, so it's time to wrap up everything that I've read for this first week of August. I had a very successful week. I managed to finish 8 books and get through over half of 2 more. But I'll talk more about that in just a second. I know that I'm not going to be able to keep up this reading pace once school starts, because some of the days that I've been working in the school, I've been listening for several hours, listening to my audiobook. Obviously with students, I'm not going to be listening to my audiobook. That would be that would be impossible. So that number is going to go down, but I wanted to sort of front load these weekdays and get my average for my goal of having my best August yet, page-wise. I wanted to get that front loaded a bit. So far, so good with that. To the one of the half books, A Fragile Enchantment. I was listening to this as an audiobook. I sorted all of my audiobook holds on Libby by what's due next. I was just reading them in that order. Came to this one. When this came and I read about it, I kind of knew that this probably would not be the book for me. While I was reading, I didn't mind it, but I knew exactly where everything was going. This is definitely a romance. It has a lot of those stereotypical tropes. Is there also magic? Yes, that's what makes it fantasy romance. This is what I would call young adult fantasy romance, so you don't have the smut and other things with it. Beyond that, I wasn't super engaged with it. And when I went to change into my running clothes after work, not yesterday, but the day before, or maybe it was yesterday. I don't even remember at this point, probably yesterday. So I go to change. At one point, I have to take my headphones off so that I can redo my hair with the headband that I used for running. And I just had this thought of, why am I still reading this? I was not looking forward to continuing to read it while I was on my run. And I just was like, yeah, I'm gonna DNF it. So once I was fully ready, put the headphones back on, changed to a new audiobook, returned this one, and so I've DNF'd it at about 60% through. Is there anything technically wrong with this? No, but it's so typical. I've seen it so many times that I had no interest. There was nothing compelling in this to draw me in. Unfortunately, the next one that I picked up suffered from having a not so great narrator. I did not like the female narrator in this book. And I almost was like, am I going to DNF this? But I didn't, because I'm like, okay, this is just the narrator. I can put up with that. And I had a much better experience. This is book 2 in this series. This is Ice Like Fire by Sarah Rosh. This is a quintessential early 2010s YA fantasy series. And I read Snow Like Ashes, which is the first book in the series, years and years ago. And I remembered vague details of it, enough that picking this one up without rereading the first one, it didn't put me off. I won't tell you much of what's happening in here because that would give away spoilers from the first book. In the first book, you have, I think, 8 different kingdoms in this world. 4 of them are driven by different seasons, and they have those names, and 4 of them are driven by different rhythms. I don't understand the nomenclature for the rhythms, but those are the 8 kingdoms. At the start of the first book, the Winter Kingdom has basically been demolished, overrun, all its people taken as captives, except for this very small band of refugees. And the main character is part of that band. And also in that band is the supposed king who has yet to come into his magic. He's trying to put together the kingdom, etc. Very young, about 16 years old, as is the protagonist. Obviously, things ensue there. This one becomes a whole lot more political with all sorts of machinations happening. The first book was very survival, classic fantasy-esque, not quest, but overturning of the big bad. There's so much political intrigue in here that it kept me reading. I still do scoff at some of the nomenclature for the seasons. Like their capital city is a month typical of that season in the Northern Hemisphere. Like the Kingdom of Summer, their capital is July. But the narrator pronounced it like July or something weird. The capital of winter is January. I don't remember what the capitals of autumn and spring are, but probably something related to that. I'm just kind of like, in one sense, I appreciate it because it's not trying to reinvent the wheel. But on the other hand, it's kind of like a little bit lame. That aside, I am definitely intrigued in this. And later on this month, we'll be getting to the sequel in this series, the conclusion to the trilogy. Probably next week, actually. This is my Buzzwordathon book, and reading the conclusion to the trilogy will help me clear off another series from my series that I started before BookTube challenge. I really should have come up with an easier way to say that. The other book that I'm more than halfway through is not a book that I have physically. I almost said that it's an arc. It's not actually an arc. It's a book that I think is going to be, might be on the young adult fantasy sci-fi list. It's Song of the Six Realms by Judy I. Lin. This is one that's decent, but I haven't given it a lot of thought yet, although I need to, because I'm about 75% of the way through the book. I think it's going to follow along, for me, my personal enjoyment and ratings of Judy Lin's debut duology, which I've read and enjoyed, which was about a 4-star. That's a win. I don't have a physical copy of that though. So technically, I've read enough pages for 8 books worth. I also, all of these, I should say, I've read as audiobook. I do have a physical book going, and I am seriously considering DNFing it. It's book 5 in the Fablehaven series, but I've come so far in this series. At the same time though, it's 677 pages. We shall see what I end up doing with that. I don't remember if I talked about this or not, but I'd gotten some manga as well, and I checked it out, Yona of the Dawn volumes 2 through 11, and I read volumes 2 and 3 to get some more physical pages in a few days ago. I don't remember what day, sometime over the weekend. I'm intrigued, but not enough to get through some of the confusing parts for me. The way that things shift in the artwork and the storytelling is very confusing for me, and I want to love it. I really enjoyed the first one. It's just not for me, unfortunately. So that was a potential manga series that I was going to read, but now I'm not going to. I do have the next volume for Spy Family, so I will definitely be reading that this weekend. I have the other volumes on hold. I don't know when I'll get those. I'm very thankful that the next volume is the one that came available. So I read a total of 8 books plus another 2 halves. So basically 9 books in 7 days. I keep saying that I'm slowing down, but the numbers say otherwise. Thanks so much for watching. I hope to see you in the next one.